Regrettably, I'm about to cause trouble. Written and narrated by Amie McNee. Chapter 32. They took me to my rooms. I was to stay there and go nowhere else until the king had decided what to do with me. They locked me in. I ran to the door in the back as soon as their footsteps softened into the distance, but it was locked too. Maude? Fuck! Rufus was still in bed. Of course he was. It could only be a few hours past midnight. Still, how could he have slept through it all? How could he have been dreaming peacefully while I went through hell? What's happened, Maude? What do you think has happened, Rufus? I yelled. I wanted to crumple up and cry. I wanted to tell Rufus that all was lost and that there was nothing to be done. The only way of holding back my tears was to stay angry, and the only person who could soak up my rage was Rufus. Why weren't you there? The Queen? He was up and getting dressed. She has lost her babe and they are blaming Hildy for it. Jesus fucking Christ. There's no point in getting dressed. They've locked us in. Maude, he whispered. Don't whisper. This isn't the time for whispering. This is a time for yelling. They've taken Hildy to a dungeon or to the Tower of London or something. Reggie said. He prophesied that I would kill another of my kind. This is it. I've killed Hildy. Nay, Maude, nay, he hushed. Reggie can't predict the weather when the storm clouds are right above him. He was right. The prophecy is coming true. Explain to me exactly what happened. Stop whispering, Rufus. Why did they take her? He asked, volume normal. Because they think she cursed the baby. But no one cursed anyone. It was born half a year too early. That's what they look like. Hildy won't be able to hear anything. She won't be able to hear what they tell her. She won't be able to defend herself. Rufus held up a finger. You sound like Zita, he said sternly. So? Don't underestimate Hildy. She is not a child who needs mothering. She will be able to look after herself for the time being. His voice was so firm, I was momentarily stunned into silence. What happened to Zita? They threw her out of court. And the Queen? She will survive the night. Does the king think she a witch? I swore to the king she wasn't a witch, and that is why they took Hildy. He said if it wasn't Anne who had cursed the child, then it must be the healer, a known witch. It was my fault. I saved Anne and betrayed Hildy. We must do something. You are exhausted. Your mind needs rest. Zita will be distraught. She will be freezing. She is out there with no money, with nothing. I harnessed what was left of my anger. You have to break down the door, Rufus. Do others know of the miscarriage? He asked. The king was loud about it as he came to our chambers, and there were many guards and ladies present. And were you known to be with the Queen? Were you witnessed with her? Lady Jane and my mother saw us there. He nodded. Jane, William, Good Thatcher, and the like will know. We must put our hopes in them. For now, you must try to sleep. We wait. Wait to see if Summers or the wizened blind man will be our accomplice. Do not underestimate them. He was cross. I felt immediately guilty. With some force, he took my hand and put me into bed. I lay there, silently crying. I had never felt so hopeless. I can't sleep. Give yourself more time, he whispered back. There was a long, drawn-out silence. He was awake. I could feel it. I rolled into him, hoping his touch would take away the images of Hildy burning at the stake. Catherine of Aragon died yesterday, he mumbled. My eyes opened. He was staring at the canopy of the bed. She died? I asked. How do you know? Does the king know? I would doubt it. I heard it from the organist, Fairfax. He had gone to visit her, in secret. He returned late last night with the news. Will he tell the king? Not if he wants to keep his head. Why would he visit her if Henry disapproves? The court loved her, Maude. You have no idea. She was adored. I am sure he is not the only one to sneak away to dote on her. And why didn't you go see her? You could be reunited with your mother. I am a slave, Maude. A trumpeter at the very best. Robert Fairfax was allowed to go, and he was just an organist. Fairfax is the organist at the Abbey and the first Doctor of Music at Cambridge. He glared at me. I would not be privy to the whereabouts of the Princess Dowager, let alone be granted an audience with her. Still, I mourn her. His voice cracked. What of your mother? I asked hesitantly. Did Fairfax say? I do not know what will happen to her. He wiped away his tears, but then his lips quivered again. Mayhap I am the one who is cursed, Maude. Mayhap you are cursed because you are near me. Mayhap my wife could see the dark magic that seeped from my skin, and that is why she left. I sat upright. No. I didn't know what else to say. You are only good, I added, stupidly. Fuck your wife, I concluded. He smiled weakly at me. Rufus, you are not cursed. This is my fault, my business. There was a click of the lock. I flinched with fear, but the door didn't open. Rufus swung his long legs off the bed and went to look. It appears we are indebted to one Jane the Fool. We were going to try and get out the servants' gate to find Zita. We were both hooded and, please God, unrecognizable. Rufus promised me that leaving wouldn't be the issue. It would be getting back in that would prove the challenge. And he was right. The gate had a guard standing by it, but he was wandering up and down the wall, leaving his post and walking 100 or so steps and then turning around again. We crouched behind a statue, waiting for an opportune moment. When he was halfway up his trodden path, we walked quickly to the gate and Rufus shook it. It was locked. We were fucked. Oi, said the guard, doing an awkward shuffle to get back to his post. Where are you two trying to go? We want to leave, said Rufus. God, you're as black as night, aren't you? Don't get many Moors around here. We are from the late Lady Catherine of Aragon's household. We came here to give word of her death. Rufus's voice was sure. The guard's face fell. The Queen? His face paled at the mistake. I mean, the Princess Dowager. She's dead. He looked upset. We have been sent to the river. We need a boat to London. There are people in town the king wants to inform before he breaks the news in the morn. He was completely dumbfounded. Dead, he whispered again. Rufus put a hand on his shoulder. The poor man was beginning to weep. Mourn in secret, he muttered. The guard swallowed, and without saying anything, he opened the door and let us out. We took the path around to the front of the palace in silence. Now what were we to do? Search the forest in a dark, foggy winter night to see if Zita had camped under a tree? Walk for miles until we reached the nearest village to see if she had taken refuge there? Catch a boat to London to see if she had done the same? And if she had, then what? Search the whole of London? And even if we did find Zita, we would... what? Storm the castle, kill the guards, take Hildy, and then live safely back at the apothecary, free from any harassment despite the fact the king knew where we lived? Fuck! I let this disastrous plot play out in my mind, and then I grabbed hold of Rufus's arm. What are we doing? I asked him. There are too many places she might be. This is useless. He shook his head, pulling me further down to the river bank. We reached the docks with the boats. The smell of rotting fish filled my nostrils. Rufus began looking into each of the barges. Did he think Zita had just picked a boat to hide in? It didn't seem like her. He rapped on a bigger boat's hull. John, he hissed. He knocked again. A man poked his head out of the small cabin. Damn your blood, grumbled the old man. His grey, pointy beard was at a distinct angle from sleeping on it. Reasonable? He mumbled, rubbing his eyes. What in God's name? He began. John, we've got a problem. I should bloody hope so. His boat rocked as he stepped off. He threw a look to me. It's nearly your time to rise, John. Don't be dramatic, Rufus said. John chuckled. Hardly. I get with the sun these days. I got another 4 hours, easy. We are in search of a woman thrown out of the palace, I said, cutting through his wasteful chatter. Who are you? Maude, I replied. He shrugged. I have seen someone. Was taking a piss when I saw a small lady, blonde hair. That's her, Rufus said. Thank God for your bad blood, John. I'm glad my leaky cock is good for something, but I will say, she weren't in a good way, wailing and screaming. We need to find her, Rufus, I said desperately. A few men got angry at her racket and she must have moved away because I didn't hear her for too long. Don't think I heard her come past my boat. That's all I got. John shrugged. How's your missus reasonable? He asked, more relaxed. We've missed you at our dice games. I tuned out as Rufus began explaining his situation. I looked up at the moon and let myself have a few indulgent tears. It was a full moon. That would mean something to Zita. Ah, well, she wasn't worth your trouble if she didn't want to fuck. The screaming banshee went to Hare Warren, called a man from a few boats down. God bless these sleepless boatsmen. Let's go, Rufus. I grabbed his arm and marched off in the direction the man was pointing. You owe me a game of dice, reasonable, John called after us. The fog was thicker in the woods. Rufus had stolen a torch off one of the last boats, and I was grateful. We went a little slower so as not to trip, but we had only walked 5 minutes or so when we found her. In ordinary circumstances, the sight would have been beautiful. In the middle of the clearing, there was an ornate stone statue. a statue of an angel. The figure stood, half in flight, her wings spread and her white tunic folding beautifully in the soft moonlight. At her feet was another woman, not stone, but flesh. She was on her knees, singing. I wouldn't call it singing. It was wailing. It was haunting. I ran to her. "Zita!" I called. She turned, shocked, scrambled to her feet and ran into my arms. My knees buckled, and we fell into a heap on the floor. "We're here, Zita, we're here." After some long drawn-out sobs, she found her words. "Did you get thrown out too, Fairy?" she asked. Rufus sat down next to us. "No, we left to find you," he explained. She rested her head on my chest, her small body folded in between my legs, and she looked at Rufus like a small, upset child looks at her father while being cradled in her mother's arms. It felt so wrong. "Hildy," she managed. "We don't know," Rufus said. She didn't continue crying, but her body seemed to get smaller still, crumpling in on itself, as if it didn't want to exist. "She won't be able to hear," she whispered into my chest. "What should we do, Zita?" I asked, desperate for our usual dynamics of aunt and niece to be returned, but she didn't appear to hear me. "What should we do?" An absent echo. She was hardly present. Zita wasn't going to be able to help us. A strong, chilled breeze whipped around us. "You will kill another of your kind," I whispered. I had thought it meant Hildy. I was going to kill Hildy. But it didn't mean Hildy. A witch for a witch. A trade.